Olá, pessoal! Estamos aqui para o nosso próximo painel e é uma honra poder discutir e debater com os nossos convidados sobre gig economy e teletrabalho. E a gente aqui, antes de começar, eu acho que é importante sempre a gente também contextualizar o conceito eu trouxe aqui de gig economy que versa sobre arranjos alternativos de emprego, formas de trabalho baseadas em empregos temporários, atividades freelancers, pagas separadamente, ou seja, que são diferentes das formas de emprego tradicionais, com salário fixo, empregador fixo. E a gente também está discutindo as questões do teletrabalho, dessas mudanças e transformações que a gente está passando, sobretudo, abruptamente, pós-pandemia. E eu queria, antes de começar o painel aqui e passar a palavra aos nossos convidados, fazer uma contextualização importante. A gente vive num contexto de pandemia, né, um contexto de transformação digital, onde a gente tem uma transição onde a estrutura social está em transição para outra estrutura social, onde a gente está passando por uma revisão, né, de quais seriam os pontos de equilíbrio para a inclusão econômica e social, para formas de trabalho decente, né? As próprias relações sociais estão se transformando de maneira completamente profunda. E nessas relações sociais, as relações de trabalho também estão se transformando. E aí fica a pergunta que eu já adiantei, como equilibrar, né? Como que a gente equilibra desenvolvimento econômico e social de longo prazo? Como equilibra inclusão econômica e social? Como equilibra as condições de emprego para buscar emprego digno e decente? E eu pego aqui o gancho também, antes de passar a palavra aos painelistas, que tem larga experiência nesse campo. Quais são os riscos que a gente pode ver, que a nossa sociedade brasileira pode ver a partir da gig economy? Como que a gente faz para mitigar esses riscos? Quais são as boas práticas que as organizações, os estados estão adotando ou discutindo, seja no Brasil ou lá fora, né? Precisamos de uma nova rede de proteção social, precisamos rediscutir a atual rede de proteção social, precisamos de uma nova reforma trabalhista. Que tipo de reforma trabalhista, né? E no âmbito das organizações, quais são as boas práticas que a gente está observando, que poderiam ser reproduzidas tanto no Brasil como no mundo afora? E aí, sem delongas, eu tenho um grande prazer aqui de anunciar a presença do Oliver Azuara, que é economista sênior na divisão de Mercado de Trabalho e Previdência Social do Banco Interamericano de Desenvolvimento e lidera operações e projetos de pesquisa com foco em seguridade social digital, futuro do trabalho e avaliação. E temos também aqui a honra de ter o Pedor Fernando Nery, que é economista, colunista de economia do Estadão e professor do IDP. O Pedro ele é doutor, mestre e bacharel em economia pela Universidade de Brasília e consultor legislativo do Senado Federal na área de economia do trabalho, renda e previdência. Apenas um aviso aqui para todos, o nosso painel vai ser em inglês e a gente gravou esse painel antecipadamente para poder fazer a transcrição em português para que todos possam entender, inclusive até aqueles que eventualmente precisariam do auxílio de Libras. Então, os palestrantes vão falar em inglês e a gente vai depois fazer perguntas e respostas logo ao final da fala dos nossos convidados em português, tá bom, pessoal? So, Oliver, thank you very much for being with us today to discuss about this very important topic and bring your international experience on this theme. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Andrei, and thank you to Mariana, Sergio Gobi, and Sergio Paulo Galindo for the invitation. I have a presentation that I want to show you, and let me just to give you an overview of what we have been doing at the IDB and what we think is important in all these topics. So as you know, we are facing a major challenge derived from COVID-19. And let me tell you that this has been a major shock in the labor markets for Latin America and the Caribbean. where up to 30 million jobs were lost in the worst part of the pandemic last year. But more importantly, in the informal and service sectors were hit by this pandemic. Some countries are starting to recover some of these employments or jobs with low quality, or the new jobs that are being created have low quality, and the formal employment shows a slow recovery only in a couple of countries. However, technology kept this from getting worse. So technology was an important ally during this pandemic, and we haven't seen a worse scenario because thanks to the use of new technologies. So, and what do I mean by this? So during the pandemic, there was a huge push in the region for the use of technologies for telework, distance training, and on-demand platforms. These last were used before, but all of these had some sort of introduction in the region, but the pandemic really pushed the use in all the countries around the world, and especially in Latin America. So if we see the rates of penetration in 2020 for telework, or the applications that are being used for telework, for training platforms, and even for semi-professional gig platforms, we see an increase. The least expansion has been in this part, or the use of gig platforms for semi-professional or professional activities is the only one where Latin America has not been developed or created more opportunities. And what worries us a little bit is that all this, or this huge push that we observed at the beginning of the pandemic, has started to erode in some countries. For instance, in Chile, the percentage of workers who usually telework increased or tripled during the pandemic, especially women, where their baseline was around 7% of the total labor force, and it increased up to 32%. For males, the fraction is lower because of the occupations, but we see that in both cases, they tripled their size, but since the second half of 2020, it has decreased. So our worry is that this push for new technologies must be permanent instead of just being part of the response to the pandemic. So this adoption, or the use of technologies, was very positive to avoid more job losses. However, there are some risks that we observe, or we are aware of, when we talk about a massive adoption of technologies. First of all, is that there is a risk of polarization and more inequality in our region, that is the most unequal in the world. So there is a need of massive and permanent low-cost adoption of platforms. And what we see as a restriction for these problems, that the lowest size, or an important fraction of the labor force, have jobs with that are not necessarily cannot not adopt some of the technologies that are available in the markets. So there is also a lag in the access of technologies and digital literacy in the region. There is a political unrest, and it could be the restriction or the regulation could be very restrictive. So, and what do we mean by this? So if we see how the telework was used by different populations, we see obviously that the higher income population, more than 60% use it, and obviously not the population or the workers in the lower distribution. And also the populations in Latin America, in different countries of Latin America, we see that their ICT skills are very low. For instance, the graph on the right shows that the fraction of population that has no experience or has failed a basic test for using a computer. So what can be done? And that's our main word at the IDB, on how to help our countries and the region to take advantage of technologies for the improvement of the labor markets. And we organize our views in three parts. The first is how to increase access to ICTs and digital literacy, and we see that it's possible to invest more to reduce connectivity costs, create digital literacy tools for workers and new generations, and how to facilitate the adoption of these tools for older generations. Also develop new skills and job certification in the cloud for the generations that are getting into the job market. So and this can be, or our view is that we can get this by new technological education based on the needs of the private sector. And that's why we're working together in many countries, developing new instruments for the reshaping of the technical education in order to be more aligned to the needs of the private sector. Also, the regional system of electronic and universal certifications of the skills in the cloud, so that we can, or different firms in different countries can recognize the skills that you can acquire in different educational systems. Finally, we believe that this is an opportunity, or that the pandemic has brought us a new opportunity to reshape the social security that was created for a reality that is no longer in Latin America. So we believe that there is an alternative to create new low-cost electronic insurance schemes, provide banking access and payment contributions on mobile devices for a large fraction of the population, and align all these new policies or new programs to the social policy that has been a typical instrument to respond to different crises, such as the one that we are facing today. So the quick, or the difficult part is how countries, or how the regulations need to be changed or adapted to the new reality. And in particular, some countries are making progress in three directions. We see the independent work and domestic workers, platform workers, and telework. However, this progress is not it's not at the level that we need, and it's very limited. And we believe it has to facilitate more flexible arrangements that can increase the opportunities or the labor opportunities for more workers. But at the same time, we need to develop some insurance schemes such as everybody cannot be on their own if something happens. And let's say in the region, many countries such as Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Panama, and Paraguay has passed these new telework laws during the last year. But it's all these new regulations need to be complemented with other elements that are included in other forms of work, such as the gig work. And many countries have adopted flexible working arrangements, but for both the private and private sectors. But we believe that this can go further and provide more flexible arrangements. So in a nutshell, I think this is the time, or what we see now is the time for a new reality, to create new forms that are more new forms of insurance that are according to the reality in Latin America, to our countries, to the needs of a big fraction of the population. And technology is a big ally, and we strongly believe that this is an opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Oliver. With your regional experience, I think it's great in having this regional perspective to right now discuss and plunge a bit more on our national perspective and challenges. Please, Pedro, thank you very much for coming, for joining us today. You have the floor, Pedro.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Brasscom for the invitation. I'm glad to be here with Oliver and Andriei. And definitely it is such an important issue of our time. I really agree with Oliver. I do think that in Brazil, at least, the so-called platforms were or have been a very important poverty reduction mechanism. I think here in Brazil, a big part of the public opinion didn't fully grasp what happened in the Brazilian labor market between the two recessions that we've lived. So if you look at the data between the end of 2016 and the end of 2019, our labor market had added some 5 million jobs. Mostly on the informal sector, but and mainly on platforms, food delivery platforms, individual transportation platforms, and I do believe that the let's say the counterfactual to this would be more unemployment or more people out of the labor force instead of more people in the formal sector, which is what a part of the public opinion thinks. So we see these guys with these backpacks delivering food. We think that's a very vulnerable position to be in. And I think most people, or a lot of people at least, think that they should have that they should be in a formal job, or at least that they would be in a formal job, formal occupation, if it wasn't by the platforms. And I can agree with that. I think they have actually relieved the situation of low-skilled Brazilians in the past few years. So there is a lot of talk going on of doing in Brazil something like the United Kingdom has done recently, which is considering these workers as formal workers and putting them on what we call here CLT, which is the main labor code and dates goes back decades. And one main issue of considering these guys formal workers is that, especially in a country like Brazil, recognizing some sort of formal employment between them and the platforms would significantly increase taxation to them. We have some of the highest payroll taxes in the world, mainly for pensions, for Social Security, but there are literally more than 10 taxes that can go on a typical wage payroll. And since they're in a vulnerable position, very probably they would have to pay more. What I think that would happen is that a lot of these guys would be banned from the platforms. A lot of people who is trying to get into the platforms, and this is also an untold story. We have a lot of people trying to get into these platforms to have these opportunities, especially during 2020. I think a lot of them wouldn't be able to get in, and those remaining, especially on food delivery, would go to a minimum wage job. So I think that's really of concern. I think part of the Brazilian public opinion is noticing that. We can see even parties more to the left sometimes speaking of a new labor contract, something different, because in the Brazilian system, the so-called rights would come with a heavy taxation as well. And one column that I wrote for Estadão last year had exactly this title and had a bigger repercussion. It was called "Não taxem os entregadores," don't tax the delivery man. And this is important. And I think this decision on how to treat them is so important, because maybe we won't stop there. We don't know how technology will advance. We do know that in more advanced countries like the United States, platforms are being used for other low-skilled jobs, but on occupations that do not have platforms in a country like Brazil as of right now. So maintenance, care, some general repairing, and I think that if this sector grows, we could have more people getting employed. So, which is really what is really interesting about technology in the labor market right now is that these platforms are very powerful, because they overcome transaction costs that we generally have when there is a demand in society and the need to hire somebody to do this service. So we have very little friction, very little transaction costs when I'm hungry and I need somebody to deliver me food. I don't need to look at the CV of this guy who's bringing me food. The job is quite homogeneous, so I can hire him, of course, through the platform. And he'll come here. We will never talk again, and he will get me the food. It's also fairly easy to monitor, verify if the job has been made, unlike other areas. So I think that's sort of why these are so powerful mechanisms to reduce unemployment or to increase employment. And I think we do have alternatives here in Brazil, probably in other emerging markets as well, to treat these guys, to give more benefits to them, especially social security benefits. In Brazil, we would call them previdência, because informality is not a new problem in Brazil. So we had in the past few years an increase in MEI, which is microempreendedor individual. It's not a very nice name, micro entrepreneur, because these guys are not really entrepreneurs in many ways. But that is a form of contribution to the government, which is extremely subsidized. We are talking about sixfold less on taxes to the same rights regarding pensions, regarding survivor benefits, regarding incapacity. So I think that's a reasonable alternative to treat these workers and to embrace new occupations that could eventually exist. So that comes at a cost, at a fiscal cost, but I think it's worth it to think on social protection detached from the payroll. And of course, we would have to talk as well in some form of basic income. We already have in Brazil and many other emerging economies something like Bolsa Família. We had a fantastic experience last year in Brazil, although very costly in fiscal terms. That was the emergency aid, auxílio emergencial. So I think increasing resources to Bolsa Família and allowing informal workers to receive them could be probably a better way to fight poverty than simply mandating that they be hired in some way or another that could harm them. So I think this is important because what Andrei asked initially was exactly how to get this sort of equilibria between these two opposite things. So it's very important that we're not conformists, saying, okay, you cannot do anything because it will do more harm than good. No, we can think on proper legislation or proper on a proper contract that protect them and make the occupation viable. And I think we should walk towards this direction. So that's my initial considerations. I'll be glad to debate them with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pedro. Very good contribution and very exciting questions you bring us to the discussion. I just would like to put a question. Are we living in a dilemma where we must have some type of basic income, but at the same time, must our society look and fight the skill problem to enable our workers to be the labor force to achieve and to promote competitiveness, economic development? How is this balancing between basic income and the needs for the society and for these workers released less and less of this income. Is that possible? I'm getting crazy or not? Just another question. Once I was discussing with the Minister of Labor in Brazil about the new labor forms, the knowledge economy, and I was surprised by a very great question from a fiscal, a guy who works in the Minister of Labor in Brazil, and he asked me, listen, you are talking about the worker for the future, this worker for the digital economy, but I must regulate and oversee the labor relations of the industrial guys. I also have the problem in Brazil of slavery. And my question is how to reform labor laws, labor regulation, and at the same time to find the right measure to keep in protecting other types of workers and do not have kind of a catastrophe in Brazil. And I would like to have Oliver, before our panel, we have been discussing about some experiences with platforms. Could you talk about the work you have been done with some companies, some platform companies, to have some figures to understanding how these workers have been performing, how are they feeling? Could you discuss about it a bit, please? And thank you very much. I keep the same order of the presentation? We start with Oliver and then we go to Pedro. Please, Oliver, you have the floor.
Absolutely. So let me just start with so we have lots of work going on in the region. Actually, for Brazil, we did an important survey to the drivers of Uber. And there are many shocking responses there, such as that the great majority of them do not have or don't work or use the platform as a full-time job. So 44% use the platform less than 15 hours, which means they use it to complement their income. And that's actually one of the other responses. The main reason for joining the platform was, first, generating income, and second, the flexibility. And that takes us to another question that we ask them, that how much will be needed in order to keep them out or take them out from the platform. And only about 42% were likely to abandon the platform in order to get a full-time job. So these people do not want a full-time job, a typical job, because they value a lot their flexibility. And more interestingly is that there is the great majority are men. It's not because they are women and they have other needs. No. Men, young people do not like to, a typical work. So this is a new reality, and the aspiration of many new generations are not the same as they were in the past. And I think our societies need to recognize this, and every member or our governments need to at least hear what the workers are saying. And the adjustments to the regulations need to take this into account. So I think it's important just to see the numbers and the opinions of people and how they are behaving, because we can be very strict with the regulation, but if nobody complies with it, it's useless. So we need to think on what's the better way to ensure the main risks that this population is living. As you were saying, the current officers need to face the economy of the typical economy. And I think the important is how to use technologies to bring all these workers to the new reality, become more friendly, and see the benefits of being part of the new economy as well.
Thank you very much. Pedro?
I think this is such a good question because it's almost as there's a paradox here, because we're talking about tech startups or platforms that are really intensive in technology, and that coexist with people doing very simple tasks like riding a bike. So that's interesting. And about training qualification, I don't think that excludes basic incomes or something like that. In fact, when we look to developed countries, especially Europe, we will see that a very big part of their welfare state is active labor policies. That's how we would call this sort of policy that includes training, and we don't see that in a country like Brazil, which actually looked to these countries and aimed to build a welfare state. We build our social security mainly in benefits, mainly in pension benefits, and this is something that is still missing, a big a network for training, which is such an integral part of the welfare state in countries like Denmark or others. They do spend like 1%, 2%, 3% of the GDP in this kind of policies. So of course that would need resources, but I definitely think that if we are in the next years to review our social contract, I think that should lead us to more benefits like basic income, like Bolsa Família, like auxílio emergencial, and also more training programs.
That's great. Thank you very much, Pedro. I would just change the subject and come to the teleworker. We are seeing, I think first, we have seen in this big pandemic some great opportunities for society to have kind of a global sandbox for some important axes, such as telework, such as telehealth, such as education, homeschooling, etc. But with these practices, we have seen some risks we must avoid, some risks we must to mitigate. So from your perspective, Oliver, how do you see this flood of telework we are living, and how organizations have been discussing it? Is there any regional or national effort to discuss how to introduce best practices for companies in terms of telework? And I would like also to put another question for Pedro, and this is very important to discuss the eventual new pension system. Have in Brazil any discussion on how to eventually finance it? Especially right now, we have been discussing our tax reform. How does it go in Brazil? And thank you very much, guys. Can I change to Pedro right now, then to Oliver, just to be more fair?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so definitely we're talking here about an agenda that demands resources, be it new social benefits like basic income, or new policies for labor inclusion, such as active labor market policies, training programs, etc. Our fiscal situation is quite concerning, but I do think that we could improve things. if we look at how advanced economies tax and spend, we would see we could make this transformation. I mean, we could actually increase the tax burden a little bit. I'm talking about income tax, about state tax. I think we have some room to make the tax system more redistributive. And also, we should change the way we spend. We spend a lot on public employees, like me, and we have some benefits, some policies that are not effective, that do not go to the poorest of the poor. So I think there is a lot of stuff that we could do, from reforma administrativa to reforming benefits like unemployment benefit, a bonus salarial, and free even dozens of billions, but could be hundreds of billions to this new social contract. It seems incredibly difficult, but if we look again on, for example, how an OECD typical country tax and spend, if we could go more to that direction, that would be a great aspiration.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oliver.
Yes, so let me just give a brief response to the alternatives for pensions. I'm not an expert in the Brazilian system, but I think, again, at the IDB, we have been testing different things on how to convince people on the importance of saving and the using precisely technology to do it in an independent way. So I think it's a time to think about that. On the telework part, I will say that there are best practices. Many European countries have introduced them, and such as, it's very difficult to put a clear separation of the personal life and the work life, because it's the same unit that you are using. Well, when you are in normal times, you leave your home, and then that's the end, and then you come back and the work is out. But having or bringing the office to your house makes or changes all the dynamics in different households depending on how the number of members are out there and how they are organized. So I think one of the best practices is to stop sending or expect responses to your emails or to other forms of communications on specific times, which is a clear barrier on when do you expect people to respond. But there are many countries in Latin America that are actually introducing these new regulations, and they are discussing this as we speak, like particularly in South America. And I will say we will. I will expect that this form of work become more normal, because it's clear that it's an option for many people, and firms can benefit from having people more, using their time in a more efficient way. So I think this is a big change in our companies, and we need to adopt or try to identify better ways. And this is an open discussion. There is no clear answer everywhere, but it's at least where people become more satisfied with their job. I think that's the key part. And again, we need to see all the best practices and regulations need to take into account what's the opinion of the workers at the end.
Thanks, Oliver. A very rich discussion, and we just would like to keep our panel for more 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, definitively. We workers, we need this discussion. Our country, our policymakers, we needed the discussion. And I would like to thank you very much for coming here today, for joining your experience, and to enrich this debate here in Brazil and especially in Latin America. And I just, as we have around more 5 minutes, I would like to come back to you to your final words. Would like to start, Pedro?
I do agree. So this is a very interesting discussion. We all know that we are living in very challenging times, but I do think that this challenging times may be an opportunity to change. I think the technology has a very important role on the future of the labor markets in emerging economies. I think that they can be a good force for social inclusion in a country like ours, and I do hope that regulation do not inhibit this kind of vehicle for economic prosperity and poverty relief. So these are my personal views. I would be glad to talk with you about them. You can find me on Twitter, and you can also find my email on the Estadão webpage or in the newspaper. And I would be glad to listen and read what you guys have to reply. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Pedro. Oliver, your final words and comments.
Well, first of all, thank you again for the invitation. Thank you, Andrei, for such an exceptional panel, and Pedro. So let me just say that this is the pandemic, the balance is terrible in the number of deaths across the region. It's a very difficult time, but recognizing that, I will say that this huge push for the use of new technologies has to have a good ending, and I think is bring more people to use them. So as we see, grandparents using their phones to communicate with their grandchildren, and to see friends and family overseas, then I think it's an important step for our societies to adopt them in a more productive way. And also it's a great opportunity to redefine our social security systems, and to, at the end, bring everybody to the table and convinced on the importance of being covered, at least for the health risks and the old age risks, because as a society we'll be better off if everybody is insured. So I think this is an important moment in our region, in the world, but especially in our region, and we need to bring responses to the table. And obviously my institution, the IDB, is going to be there for whenever it's needed. Thank you so much for the invitation again.
Thank you so much, Oliver, too. And I think we are coming to an end to this panel. Thank you very much. It was very exciting to listen to you and learning a bit with your experience. And definitively, I would like to take your final words. And we need to dream. We need to look for this balancing between economic development and social inclusion. Otherwise, we are going to face a huge challenging. And I would take Pedro's words. Challenging times are an opportunity to change it, definitively. And thank you very much for your inspiration, your knowledge shared here today to us to build this future. Thank you very much, guys. And for the audience, have a great event. Pessoal, encerramos aqui esse nosso painel que foi gravado. E eu aconselho a todos ficarem ligados no próximo painel, que vai ser ao vivo, sobre disrupção digital, que vai contar com o Benjamin Quadros, que é CEO da BRQ, e o Thales Teixeira, que é fundador da decoupling.com. Bom evento a todos!